So I'm going to start with a brief apology. I know that I was hoping to get into a bit of a regular thing in terms of live streams, and I've not done any this week. I've been a little bit unwell, so it's just not been something that I've been able to do. Hopefully I will be able to get back into that sometime soon. Touch wood, I'm aiming for Thursday morning, which is my Thursday morning, so if you're in Canada and the States, then that would be Wednesday afternoon, Wednesday evening. I am, however, attempting to push on and at least get a video out each day in absence of any live streams. So in this video, I wanted to address something that just seems to have been forgotten, glossed over, I would say, and that is the accusation from Hayley about Daniel using rugs in the bathroom when they were there for the search. Now, this was something that Hayley came out with quite early on in the piece, and a few months ago, maybe 3 or 4 months ago, I think it was even Daniel came out with it and said, oh no, that's not the truth, and Hayley has redacted that or something like that. And that didn't come directly from Hayley, that came directly from Daniel. And yet people just accepted it and went, okay, yeah, that's been redacted, so Hayley just made that up. It's just another example of the many instances when Daniel has come out and done his bit to redirect the narrative, and for some reason people have just accepted it and not questioned it. And of course, over time, people even forgot where that information came from, so that all of a sudden it's just like considered factual that, well, no, Hayley redacted that. She's saying that that didn't really happen. Well, I have not heard that come from Hayley. I have heard talk that she was given threats after she had made that statement. But to the best of my knowledge, Hayley herself has not come out and said, no, that's not true, I'm just taking that statement back now. But people seem to have accepted it. So rather than blindly accept it, I wanted to dig into it a little bit. So I've got audio from Hayley, Daniel and Janie. I could have gone and grabbed the audio from Cheryl as well, but I've done a few videos on this before in terms of the altercation at the end of the driveway, because Janie claims that she wasn't there, and yet Logan pretty much just dropped her in it and said, yeah, Janie was there. I will endeavour to find that particular video and link it down below, so if you go into the description for this video, you should be able to find it. That said, given that I have been covering this case from the first week, there are currently 275 videos in my Jack and Lily playlist, so it may take me a bit to find it, but I will do my best. Okay, so I'm going to jump in and first of all start with the audio from Hayley, and then we'll go from there.
So this was just before the briefing, if I can remember quite right here. We were all in the house and Dan was in the bathroom. And when I say we, I'm talking about my sister-in-law, her sister, Malehya's mother, my partner. And we were all in the kitchen and we heard like things rustling around in the bathroom. We're like, what the hell? So my stepmom went and knocked on the door and was like, Dan, what's going on? Are you all right? Anyway, my sister-in-law went in and said she needs to use the bathroom. So he came out and he's kind of like hovering. So Shelby, Cheryl said I was her sister-in-law. It's like confusing, but Shelby's with my brother. She's my sister-in-law and Cheryl is Shelby's sister. So yeah, so like he was wrestling some things around in the bathroom and we went in to kind of investigate after him, and there was drugs. Drugs was involved, and that's what fueled the family altercation in the driveway. And I'll be the one to say that because I got so freaking mad after this was found out, because then I said to him, I said, that's exactly why you're acting the way you are, running around like a madman acting like you're doing everything and everybody's just sitting back, like relaxing. Like nobody was, but nobody was running around like a chicken with their head cut off because we weren't on drugs. Do you know what I mean? But that's what the altercation was, because I was like, I confronted his family. It was actually me. And I said, what the hell, guys? Like, what's going on here? Like, why is that involved? My sister broke down and she admitted that he's been on it for 2 years or so. And yeah, so they all got very mad when that came about, and they all kind of said, you know what, we already knew that. Well, if you knew that, why the hell is there children in a home with somebody like that? Like, why aren't you protecting the kids that way? Like, do you know what I mean? So that was the big piece that Logan and whoever else, this Darren guy that is related to Malehya's side, I mean, he's just spewing a bunch of stuff that's not 100%.
Okay, so if you think back about the narratives that we've heard from Daniel, Janie, Durwood, etc., the difference here is that what Hayley is telling us here has some real substance to it. And I'm going to break this down for you. So, first of all, there's no gaps in the narrative. It's all solid, linear details, starting from them being there in the living area, hearing the rustling sounds in the bathroom, down to the altercation at the end of the driveway. And the thing that you will have noticed here is that we're getting sensory and cognitive experiences included. So she heard the rustling sound. So that's a sensory experience. When you start having sensory experiences thrown in, then it does sound more credible. Yes, I know Janie talks about hearing the children outside, but she doesn't really know what she heard. In some stories, she heard them laughing and giggling. In other stories, she just heard them. She doesn't give any description of what it was that she heard. And then at other times, when they're out there running through the gate or something, she describes Lily's scream or whatever it is. So it's less tangible the way Janie describes it, whereas Hayley is giving us an understanding of what they heard. It was a rustling sound coming from the bathroom. And she gives us the cognitive response to that. She's like, she thought, what the heck? That's not exactly the words, but, you know. So she's showing cause and effect. She heard this sound, she had this response. The other thing that you get here in this narrative is it's not all about Hayley. She's not the starring character surrounded by faceless, nameless individuals. She talks about Cindy, she talks about Cheryl, and she talks about Shelby. So there are other people in this retelling who have roles in what is being told. So that is another sign that this is more than likely something truthful. When you listen to the way she's talking, there's no pauses in her speech. She is telling it like she is actually describing the situation. I can picture it the way she is telling it because there is no gaps in the narrative, because she is giving the sensory and the cognitive experiences. And she's also expressing emotions here. She got so freaking mad. She's explained why. She does not think that it was a suitable environment for the children. This is a young mother who clearly wouldn't put her children in that sort of situation. So she has expressed her anger that Lily and Jack were left in this sort of situation. But she's not just describing herself having emotions, she's talking about the other people who were there, and they all got very mad as well. So she is describing suitable emotions for the situation. When she relays what she said to Daniel, she is doing it in natural speech. It's just like, and you know, I said to him this thing. It's not like some of the other things we've heard from people where it sounds like it is scripted, like it is something that you would see written on a piece of paper. And then I said this, and then he said this. You know, that sort of scripted sound. It sounds natural the way she's saying it. And the other thing here is too, rather than using explicit language, she is expressing frustration through the way she is telling her experience. So it's not just going, oh, it's just so frustrating, blah, blah, blah. But the way she talks about Durwood and Logan leaving gaps in their narrative, you can hear the way she's describing it, the way she's talking about it, and you can tell that there is frustration there. So for me, this always sounded credible. I believed her, and I still do. So I found it really interesting when all of a sudden people are saying, oh, look, Hayley took her statement back and it didn't really happen. She said that didn't really happen. And like I said, I've seen no evidence of Hayley herself coming out and saying that. This is something that's come from Daniel. And for some reason, even though Daniel is a known liar, even though Daniel seems to change the narrative as often as most people change their socks, people believed him, which is why I'm doing this video. So, moving on from this. Now, we have not had a direct statement from Janie or Daniel actually saying that what Hayley said is not truthful. I've looked and I'm not aware of it. Again, there is this presumption that they have said this simply because of the story that was being put out that Hayley had basically taken her story back. Again, that never came directly from Hayley. So what I want to look at next is Daniel's discussion with the turkey guy, specifically in relation to his use of drugs, because to me this is very telling. There's a lot of deception going on here.
Are there any stipulations that you have? Like, are you forced to take any drug tests or anything like that?
Drug tests, and I have to do therapy, psychological exam. What else do we have? There's so many things. I mean, I have meetings with my lawyer. That takes time too for that case.
So the discussion here is over what is required of Daniel in terms of CPS. And he's talking about, yeah, he does have to do drug tests. The other thing that we have been told from multiple sources is that he had to attend anger management and that he was attending Narcotics Anonymous. These are things that you do not have to do unless there is actually an issue there. But of course, Daniel would like everyone to just think that this is just standard practice and everyone has to do it. And this is no evidence of him using drugs. Now, the turkey guy hones in on that a little bit more, which I have to give him credit for doing that.
Now, I know that some people have questioned this a lot. Drug use.
Yeah.
Is that something that you've ever had a problem with?
I've used drugs before in the past. I'm not ashamed to say that. I'll be the first person to say that.
And when did it stop?
It stopped before the disappearance. Obviously, I wasn't using drugs during the search or anything like some of Malehya's family claim to say.
Okay, so by now most of you are extremely familiar with the lizard lips, so I have no doubt that most of you noticed that when he is talking about this, you got a bit of lizard lips going on even before he started speaking. But I think most of you have noticed by now that usually when there's a big whopper coming, that's usually when you get the lizard lips beforehand. So again, we get that before he's even started speaking. But we also get this duper's delight going on. So he has this stupid grin on his face while he's claiming that, yeah, he's used in the past. He's not ashamed of that. But you actually see a visible change in his expression as soon as the turkey guy asked him, when did that stop? You can actually see that stupid grin slide off his face. and all of a sudden the eyes are going down, and there's a pause before he even starts speaking. Because I think up until that point, he thought this turkey guy was only going to ask him soft questions. He thought the turkey guy was his friend, so he wouldn't be putting him on the spot like that. Now, as well as that pause before he starts talking, you then hear the language not quite agreeing. So instead of saying it stopped or I stopped, he comes out with it stop, no ed on the end. This is again a mental filler. He's trying to think of what to say, so he's not focusing on what he's saying. He's just repeating the question back, but only partially. And then he says before the, and he trails off as he's saying the. You can tell he's still trying to figure out what sort of answer he should be giving to this. Now, if he had actually truly stopped, he would be able to tell you an answer here outright without needing all these pauses, all these fillers. And then he says, before the disappearance, obviously. When you hear someone throwing in obviously, that is persuasive language, of course. So he is trying to double down on it. Well, of course. I wouldn't have been using it when they went missing. But note also not only the emotional disconnect, but the passive language. The disappearance. It's not, it stopped before, or I stopped, before Lily and Jack went missing. No, it's just, it stopped trailing off, or before the disappearance. It could have been a disappearance of anything, the way he's telling it here, because it is very disconnected. There's no emotional connection whatsoever. There's no mention of Lily and Jack's names. Anyway, so we've got the obviously, the whole bit of persuasive language, and, obviously I wasn't, and there's a pause, using drugs during another pause during the search. So he can't even get that sentence out in full. You get pauses and you get repetition. So straight up, that tells me that, yeah, he probably was. It certainly shows a lot of signs of deception here, especially because he has to offer up the obviously. Well, it's not obvious to us. And he gives no explanation of why it should be obvious, why he thinks that it should be obvious that a person wouldn't use drugs when they're out searching for missing children. But again, notice the passive speech. It's the search, not I didn't use drugs while I was out searching or anything like that. It's like during the search. And then straight up he throws a bit of Darvo in there. So the deflection, basically what he's doing here is the reversing the victim and offender. So he's basically saying, or any of that stuff that some of Malehya's family claim to say. So here he's saying, basically, deflecting it in terms of it's just an accusation that's being made by Malehya's family. I'm the victim here, they're just saying this to make me look bad. He's trying to paint it as unfounded accusations, even though he's already admitted that he does do drugs, even though he's got this ridiculous doofer's delight going on when he's talking about it.
Gotcha. And so this is a problem from a while ago, or is this a recent problem that you've had?
Well, Daniel, was never really a problem. Like, I wasn't going into any psychosis or being, crazy in any way. I wasn't doing like breaking enters or, doing anything like that to feed an addiction.
Right. And so,
First of all, note how he tried so hard to keep that tongue locked in place, but the moment he finished saying it, it's like the tongue zipped out and back in again really quickly. Like, he just could not control it. So the turkey guy refers to it as a problem, and he asks, is it a problem from a while ago or a recent thing? And yes, if you are someone who is regularly using drugs and most likely addicted, then it is a problem. It has all sorts of impacts on your life. And what Daniel comes out with is it was never really a problem. This is something that could only be said by someone who is still using drugs. Because had he given up using the drugs, he would be able to recognise the impact that it was having on him. Because he would have that greater clarity that comes from having stopped using. So for him to say it was never really a problem, first of all, throwing in that qualifier of really, it was never really a problem, means that actually, yeah, it has been a problem. But I'm going to tell you, I'm going to try and hope that you think I'm telling you it was never a problem. But I'm going to throw really in because my brain won't let me lie to you. And I know it's been a problem. I know it's still a problem. But I don't want to admit to that openly. So I'm going to try and lie to you, but my brain's going to interrupt. So that's what's happening here with the throwing in the really. His brain is like going, yeah, it's a problem. While his mouth is trying to go, yeah, it's not a problem. Oh, good. You know, nothing to see here, folks. But what he said after that has just caused alarm for me from the moment I heard it. Because he has offered this up voluntarily. The Turkey guy was referring to it as a problem in terms of it's a problem because it's an addiction. It's a problem because it's something that is costing you money, something that is impacting on your life. But Daniel actually offers up specifics that it's never resulted in a psychosis or being, crazy in any way. And you'll note that, again, we're getting the pauses in the speech. He's having trouble spitting it out, which to me says that, especially because he has voluntarily offered this up, this was not asked of him. He is denying something that was never asked, which is a huge red flag. That says to me that he has had some serious episodes during his drug use. And it certainly calls into question what actually happened to Lily and Jack. I mean, first you get this denial in a way that only an active drug user would deny, and then you get these details offered up that weren't asked for, these denials that weren't even asked about. This to me is a massive red flag, and honestly, from listening to what he's saying here, the things I take away from it is that, yes, he was using right up until when Lily and Jack went missing and during the week when everyone was searching, and that he is continuing to use because he speaks like an addict who is still using.
But when was the last time then that you did use?
Much before the disappearance. I can't put an actual day on it, but it was much before.
Gotcha. And so
I didn't have any drugs. There was no drugs on the property. There's no meth labs. There's nothing like that. You would have seen me going on handcuffs the very first day if there was drugs, right?
I would assume so.
Yeah.
When they say that there's no evidence of a criminal offense, I would assume drugs would be a criminal offense. So,
yeah, that's correct. And investigators even told me, they said, Daniel, if you had any drugs, we would just take them. But we know there was no drugs on the property, so.
Yeah.
Again, serious red flags here. He's asked when the last time was that he'd used drugs. And he's like, so the pause while he's thinking, he's trying to think of a good answer, and he says, much before the disappearance. That's not even grammatically correct. Again, when the language starts to fall apart, you know that this is not someone being truthful. Not only that, it's so vague. If he truly had stopped using, he would know how long it had been since he stopped using, especially given that he's been apparently going to Narcotics Anonymous, which means you would expect him to say exactly how many days he's been clean. But instead he says, I can't put an actual day on it. And then he repeats, but it was much before. Now, aside from the it much before being totally grammatically wrong, note that he says, I can't put an actual day on it. So his brain is actually only thinking of that week when the children went missing and trying to think of a day around when they went missing, as opposed to, I can't put a timeline on it. I can't give a specific length of time. He's talking about a day. And part of me thinks that, well, if he's saying I can't put an actual day on it, the way he's saying it suggests that he was using every single day the week that the children went missing. But it is such a vague response, and is the response that you get from someone who is still using, someone who has not stopped. And of course the response comes with that little bit of duper's delight going on as well. He thinks he's being convincing, but it is so clear that he's lying here. And then, even though the question was a simple, when was the last time you used, he then goes into this lengthy explanation of details that weren't asked for. He didn't have any drugs. There weren't any on the property. There was no meth lab. And then he comes out with more stuff about it. He's really, really trying to oversell it here. But what he does is hilarious, because he says, you would have seen me going in handcuffs on the first day, right? He throws in the right to show that that is the only response. You have to say yes. He wants an affirmative answer, so the right is signalling, this is the answer I expect from you. I expect you to agree with me, because my statement, I expect you to take it as truthful, as being there's no other option. And of course, just for starters, they weren't searching for drugs on the first day. They were searching for children, so they weren't looking inside cupboards, inside Janie's RV, or Janie's cupboard that she claims didn't exist, even though in one statement she spoke about her cupboard, in another statement she said there was never a cupboard. But we had 4 or 5 trips from that property in the early hours of the morning on May the 2nd. No explanation for that. What was being removed from the property at that time. We also have him going into town early on the following day to collect his drug mates. So, yes, maybe there wasn't anything on the property at the time that they finally searched the property. I have speculated for some time now that he hid his stuff in Janie's RV, and that's what her meltdown was over. It was either that, or she was having a meltdown because Justin was staying in the RV, not her, and it would have been apparent, and it would have dragged him into the investigation. But it certainly seems plausible that they're going to report the children missing, so they need to remove anything from the house that's going to get any criminal charges against them. Where are you going to put them? In your mother's RV, because you think... And they did. They thought at first that authorities were just going to buy their story of the children just wandering off. But here's the amusing part, and it shows exactly how much of a liar this guy is. It shows how much of a made-up bit of narrative this is. Because he says, on one hand, you would have seen me being taken out in cuffs on the first day, right? And then he claims that actually the investigators told him that if he had any drugs, they would have just taken them. So he's given 2 contradictory stories. The second one, of course, was in response to the comment by the Turkey guy of, well, they did say there's no evidence of a criminal offence, which Daniel thought that was brilliant. You could see the smirk on his face. And he ran with it, and that's correct. But the thing is, that's not what they were referring to. If children go missing and they are aware that there is drug use in the house, unless they can directly connect that drug use to the disappearance of the children, then they're still going to say that there is no evidence of a criminal offence in relation to the disappearance of the children. But I think it seems pretty clear that Daniel did make a point of removing all his stuff prior to when the RCMP was called. So everything we've heard here certainly points towards him still using at the time the children went missing, and it certainly points to a very strong possibility that he was using on the day that Hayley and that allegedly caught him in the bathroom. I mean, this was in the afternoon, so you would imagine that at that end of the day, wherever he had this stuff hidden, he probably was just like desperate, pulled it out, had to have his little hit, and then got caught out. It certainly makes a lot of sense. Now, you heard Hayley talking about the altercation, and she was very specific. It made me, at least, feel like I could understand what she was talking about, like I could almost picture what had happened, because she was quite descriptive in how she was explaining the situation, and she did have in emotions and cognitive experiences and, you know, your anger and all that sort of stuff. So now I'm going to play Janie's statements about it. I'm just going to put two back to back because she pretty much just says the same story twice over. So there's no point in me stopping and commenting partway through. So I'll play it all first and you'll see the difference.
So I came back here, me and Justin came back here to the trailer. Malehya was standing on the edge of the driveway, crying her eyes out. I went up and I put my arms around her and said, please don't tell me that they found the kids dead. Hayley started shooting off about something, and then I think it was Shelby, I'm not 100% sure, she started shooting off. I ordered them off my property. The police or the RCMP came and asked me what was going on, if there was a fight. I said there was no fight, I just ordered them off my property. He took me aside. He has it all video cammed. He took me aside and asked me what happened. I said, Malehya, exactly the same thing. Malehya called me. I came back here to the trailer. I thought the kids were dead. Then Hayley and this other girl, I think it was Shelby, I can't be 100% right, started shooting off. I told him to get off my property. He asked me what the altercation was about. I said I didn't know. I didn't listen to them. Which I have no knowledge about. I didn't listen to what I just went up to her and said, please don't tell, she was crying. I said, please don't tell me that Jack and Lily are dead. And then, as I said, Hayley and her friend, I think it was Shelby, I can't be 100% sure, started saying stuff. I wasn't in the mood to listen to arguments. I didn't want to fight because whatever was going on had nothing to do with Jack and Lily. That's when I ordered them off the property.
So for starters, she implies that she went back to the property because Malehya called her. But she doesn't explain why Malehya called her. She wants people to believe that Malehya called her because there was this altercation going on. But what she does is that she has the altercation starting once she's back at the property. So Malehya just randomly called her up and said, come back, for no reason whatsoever. And then Janie gets back just as this altercation begins. And then even with the explanation of it, she's like, she says, oh, there was no fight, I just ordered them off the property. And then in the second retelling, it's, I didn't know what it was about, I didn't listen. But she's saying that it was a fight. It was an argument. So she's being very vague. She's not giving any details. Basically, it's just that Hayley started shooting off. Hayley and Shelby started shooting off. So they just randomly, out of the blue, just the moment that Janie happened to get back to the property, having been called back by Malehya for no apparent reason, they just started shooting off. And she's so evasive here, she does not give any details over what it was they were shooting off about. And she's just like, I didn't want to listen. It didn't have anything to do with Jack and Lily, so I didn't want to listen. So I don't know what it was about. So lots and lots of evasion here. And there's holes in the narrative. And of course, she's not describing any cognitive experiences, any emotional experiences, anything like that. It's just a very one-dimensional description which really doesn't explain much at all. And I think you can agree, she's definitely leaving out crucial information here. Now, while this is something that I have been wanting to address for quite some time, it actually wasn't on my schedule for today's video. I actually had another video, I'd already got the clips prepared, and I was just going through my Daniel folder on Google looking for a particular screenshot that I knew I had. And going through all my screenshots looking for that particular one, I came across screenshots from the first time that Daniel actually came out and started sharing on a content creator's live stream. And this was on Dolly Vision on the 19th of June, I believe. So in this live stream, Daniel just popped up in the chat section and he was trying to get Dolly's attention. And he finally got Dolly's attention, and then Dolly clicked on his account, saw that it was really Daniel, and there was this conversation between them for a large portion of the live stream where basically Dolly was asking the questions. He was trying to encourage Daniel to actually call in rather than typing the answers, but Daniel just wanted to stay in chat and offer his responses. There were people in chat going, "It's fake, it's not the real Daniel, it's fake." And Dolly's like, "I've been in and I've looked at his account, this is the real Daniel." So Daniel was throwing in, this was his first attempt at controlling the narrative with a content creator. So he was throwing in comments everywhere as much as he could, trying to steer the narrative, trying to convince Dolly of his story. This also coincidentally is the same day that him and Durwood set up Malehya to do a runner to the reserve so that basically they could then get CPS to swoop in and take Meadow. And yes, I believe that is much more like what happened as opposed to the story that this Anita is now coming out with, because that makes no sense whatsoever. So Daniel was there in that live stream trying to make it clear that, hey, guess what? Malehya is such a bad person, she even did a runner from CPS. And now they've taken Meadow off her. But he was throwing in other comments at the same time. So like I said, I was going through all my screenshots looking for a particular screenshot to use in another video, and I came across this one. So as you can see, there's the title for that live stream, so if you wanted to search it up and just go through the whole conversation yourself, you can. But the very first thing up here, Daniel has said, yes, her family found everything and got CPS involved and started disturbance outside the house. Now, you could think, well, he's trying to say her family found out everything and got CPS involved. But first of all, either way, it's an admission of guilt. Her family found out something that made it worth them contacting CPS and getting them involved. So there's definitely something there that was significant enough for them to contact CPS. But I do think that he hasn't left out the found out and has actually said her family found everything, because he then goes on to talk about the disturbance outside the house. So the way this is being told certainly suggests that them finding everything was what led to the disturbance outside the house, which would tie in very nicely with Hayley's story of, yeah, we discovered the stuff in the bathroom and that's what the altercation was about. Of course, he then follows up by claiming that the altercation was them claiming that he did it. He doesn't say what it is, but he's saying they yelled, "I did it," which suggests that he is referring to a specific thing that occurred, which also, to me, sounds like a bit of an admission of guilt. But as he goes on, he then goes on to push the whole thing. Oh, well, you know, the RCMP said a drug test is not a concern. I asked for a drug test. No drugs. Dogs went through the house and property. They were not drug dogs, for starters. So you can see his train of thought here. He has come out and said her family found everything, and then there's this disturbance at the end of the driveway, and then he tries to explain it away by saying that they accused him of doing it, which, like I said, sounds like an admission of guilt there, because doing what, Daniel? It sounds very specific. And then he goes on to talk about, well, to deny drugs. So there's this linear thing you can see here of her family finding something or finding out something which led to them getting CPS involved and also caused the disturbance outside the house. And then moving on, after having a bit of a stab at her family, he then talks about him not needing to take a drug test because even though he asked for one, the RCMP said, yeah, you know, it's no concern. And of course, you know, they had drug dogs on the property, which is a big no. Like, no drugs. Dogs went through the house and property. That doesn't mean that there were no drugs, because those dogs were not trained to detect drugs or alert to drugs. So, in spite of this claim that, like I said, has come from Daniel, that Hayley has retracted her statement, we've not once heard Hayley come out and say this herself. This is just something, like I said, that's been put out by Daniel and his crew, and people have just accepted it without question. And that nobody's turned around and asked Hayley, did you retract this statement? Nobody has turned around and said, well, why were people making threats against her if she's retracted this statement and if the statement was nothing? And when you look at what Hayley said alongside what has been said by Daniel and Janie, she certainly sounds far more believable than either of them. And then finally you get that statement in Dolly's live stream where clearly I suspect that Daniel was probably a bit drugged out when he went into that live stream. And so he probably wasn't thinking logically about what he was putting there in the first place. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up there. I'm going to be very interested to read your comments on this video and see what your thoughts are here. So, on that note, thanks for listening. If you are new to my channel, please subscribe. Also, please hit the like button and please leave a comment below. So, thank you, and I'll catch you in the next one.